Well, the first in our occasional series of chats, really, is our warden, Professor Chris Gaskell. And Chris has just taken over the top job, but he has plenty of other things to do to keep him busy. So, hi there, Chris.
Hi, good to see you.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us what brought you to Gloucestershire first and foremost.
Oh, right. What brought me to Gloucestershire? Well, I mean, the formal answer to that is because I got a job at the Royal Agricultural University in 2007, and I came down from Liverpool. There's a bit of a backstory to that in that perhaps I've been looking to move on from Liverpool. I'd been there quite a while. And my daughter, who already lived in Gloucestershire, said to me, you know what, there's this job being advertised. I think you should have a go for it. Because she was a graduate of the RAC, as it was then. So she persuaded me to apply, so apply I did.
Excellent. And you were working in what capacity in Liverpool? Was that as a vet or in academia?
Well, I'd been in Liverpool for some 25 years. And so I'd started off, I'd moved up from Bristol. Bristol was where I was before. And I moved up from Bristol University to the University of Liverpool to take on the job as in a new chair of small animal medicine in the vet school at Liverpool. So yes, I went there in 1982, but then over 25 years moved from that position to the Dean and to Pro Vice Chancellor. It was Pro Vice Chancellor, which was an admin job really. I'd gone over to the dark side according to my academic colleagues. And so I moved into administration for the last few years at Liverpool. Yeah, so that's what I've been doing up there.
Okay, to bring us back to Cirencester, though. I mean, so when you got to Cirencester, many of our members will remember that the college was given university status. I mean, had that already happened by the time you arrived?
No, that hadn't. It was we were firmly, as we had been since 1845, the Royal Agricultural College. I mean, we had many of the stigmata, as it were, of a university. We awarded our own degrees. We were funded by the funding council like other universities, but we didn't have the name. We couldn't call ourselves a university. And it really, the only good reason for that, well, there wasn't a very good reason in that, was that we didn't have enough students. There was a regulation at that time that you had to have 4,000 students before you could call yourself a university. I belonged to a group of small universities, or the university, the RAC had belonged to a group of small universities, and we've been lobbying the then minister, which is David Willits, now Lord Willits, saying that maybe quality should be the yardstick, not quantity. And he kind of agreed, and of course he was seduced as a politician by the thought that he could, at a stroke, create another, 20 new universities on his watch, as it were. And so he was quite easily persuaded, and so he changed the regulations, and so in 2012 we became a university, and somewhat contentiously changed our name to the Royal Agricultural University.
I bet people still call it the Royal Ag, though, don't they?
Yes, they do, and that's interesting. I mean, you called it the Royal Ag, and at the time when people were saying you can't change the name, all that history, all that brand recognition, etc., we said, well, what do you say to people when they say, where have you been to get your training? And they say, oh, I've been to the Royal Ag or Cirencester. And we said, well, neither of those terms has either college or university in it.
Yeah.
And actually, the rebranding went smoothly enough once the initial opposition was debated with.
Yeah. So, I mean, we now have, is it 3 universities? I mean, the Gloucestershire University, Hartpury, does that count as a university?
Yeah, yes, Hartpury is a university as well now, and of course UWE is, strictly speaking, in the county in South Gloucestershire. So yeah, we're an interesting county in our higher education provision.
Absolutely. Tell us about your ambition when you were a spotty 16-year-old. I mean, you know, your career has been through veterinary science and science in other areas of food science, for instance. I mean, where did you grow up, and what were your thoughts when you were, as I say, 16?
My upbringing was determinedly non-veterinary. I was brought up in classic suburban London, in Harrow, which is North London, on the Metropolitan line, and I used to go into school on the Underground. My parents lived in Harrow for many years and then did what everybody did, moved out a long as Betjeman had it, into Metro land to Chorleywood. So yeah, I grew up a very ordinary suburban life. There was no veterinary background in our family, and to be honest, I don't know why I fixed on veterinary science, but I did at a fairly early age, much to my parents' delight, because at least I decided what I wanted to be. And in those days, I freely admit it wasn't as difficult to get into veterinary science as it is today.
It is a massively, I mean, it may have been different when you were training, but it is now certainly a massively long and one assumes expensive road, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, it was just as long when I qualified or when I was at university. It had just gone actually from 4 years to 5 years, which is the same as medicine, same as dentistry. You say expensive, it's certainly expensive now, but it wasn't. I mean,
no.
Us baby boomers, we've had a bit of a charmed existence, really, haven't we? One thing.
Absolutely right.
And I got a very nice local authority grant. Thank you very much, and I got my fees paid. And so I went through university, spending money wisely, perhaps, or certainly only as a student could, and ended up with no debt at the end. So I'm hugely grateful for that, and it's something that we can only dream about now for current students.
Yeah. And briefly, your mum and dad, I mean, do you have brothers and sisters, or?
Yeah, I have a brother. My brother is an academic. In fact, he was a vice chancellor as well. He was vice chancellor 2 years ago, Queen Mary University, London. Now a member of the Russell Group. So he was a chemist. He went to Bristol as well, and yes, made his way through chemistry. He's a mass spectrometrist. If don't ask me to elaborate on it. It's a way of measuring very small quantities of things and deciding what they are. So yes, he was a chemist, an academic chemist, and then went into university administration. My parents, my mother was a teacher, but also a homemaker. She worked part-time, and one of my, I was going to say abiding memories, but abiding thinking backs about my childhood was how my parents put in a huge amount of effort into making sure that my brother and I got a good education, because they thought that was important. My father was a grammar school boy from Lancashire, brought up in Blackburn. Father worked in the mill. He didn't go to university because he was lucky to stay on till 18, and that was quite long enough as far as his parents were concerned. He was a civil servant, worked in what's now DEFRA, which was then the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Foods. Yeah. So it's amazing how things... a slight animal connection, but not really.
But so All Creatures Great and Small, when you were at university, was that on the television?
Yeah. James Hurrell, or Alf White as his real name. Yeah, he was writing his books and the television programs were being made. And it's extraordinary thinking back. I mean, he did a huge amount for the veterinary profession, because he quite rightly portrayed the veterinary surgeon in that setting as a part of the fabric of the local community, and the somewhat jokey way in which he describes being a bit of a Robin Hood, taking fees from those who could afford it, and perhaps even loading those fees a little bit, so that he could treat the old lady's cat that had been run over, or the cow of the farmer who was on his beam ends, and not bother to charge them, or charge them a very limited amount. He spoke of an age that still exists to some extent in some parts, but really veterinary practice, like so many other areas, has been corporatized now. My son's a vet, and he works in a Yorkshire practice, and he's worked in the sorts of environments that Harriet was describing.
So you must have clear memories of when you had to do something significant on whilst your degree. It must have been quite nerve-wracking when you had to deliver a lamb, or you had some complicated operation to do that you probably went on to do, castrating a dog, for instance, things that probably are bread and butter of veterinary science nowadays. But when you were a young lad, starting out a bit wet behind the ears, it must have been a bit, wasn't it?
Yes, it is, and that's all changed too now. I mean, I think new graduates get much greater supervision and have to go through a much more prescribed set of early graduation training. I mean, it's hugely to the credit of the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons that they brought that in. But you're right. In my day, it's making us feel terribly old, isn't it? This. But in my day, when I first graduated, for a reason which I could go into, but I decided to apply for and then got a job in the United States. Rosalind and I, who got married while we were students, we went to the States, and I went to work as an intern, which was the lowest of the low, in the University of Pennsylvania Vet School Veterinary Hospital in the small animal clinic. And yes, I can remember being petrified. In fact, I remember arriving. I had to get there by June the 30th because my job started July the 1st. And July the 4th weekend, everybody went home, except one intern and a few students. And the other interns, one was Thai from Thailand, and he hadn't yet arrived. The other two were from North America, and they wised up to the fact you don't offer to do the July 4th weekend. So it fell to the Limey, it fell to the Brit to have that weekend. And yes, things were presented to me that weekend which, shall we say, tested me. And I met and did things and were introduced to new diseases that I'd never seen before and didn't know how to. I mean, I had backup on call. It wasn't all bad, but no, it was a baptism of fire.
And how long were you there for in the States?
Well, the job was a year, and Rosalind worked in virology and epidemiology for a year. And then at the end of the year, although we'd been paid a pittance, we'd worked so hard we had no time to spend any of it. And so we took 3 months and drove around the United States for 3 months, and then came back to the UK. Rosalind to do a PhD and me to see if I could find a job at Bristol, which fortunately I did.
So was that a job in a vet's practice?
No, fortunately, Rosalind, as I say, had a PhD set up in virology back at Bristol where we graduated. And I got a job on a scholarship of £1,000 a year, paid quarterly, £250 quarterly, in radiology in the Department of Surgery. So for the first couple of years when I came back, I was a trainee radiologist. Long time ago.
It's a funny thing, these skills that you learn as early in life, that you walk away from, don't you? In later life, you become a highly respected academic. You've led a college to university. You're now running the Honourable company, and there are plenty of other things in between as well. But you have a lot of skills. And I wonder whether you've ever been tempted to sort of go back to that sort of shop floor work that you did so long ago.
You're
sorry
right.
To say so long ago. The early part of your career, Chris.
Yeah. No, you do accumulate skills, and some of them are they're transferable skills. They're things that you can apply. They're approaches that you can apply. So the methodological approach to a radiograph, for example, silly things. You taught right at the beginning. When you see a new radiograph for the first time and you're trying to make a diagnosis on the basis of it, you don't focus on the middle, on the bit that you've taken it for, but just check around the outside and make sure there's nothing else that you should have seen. I learned that the hard way in Philadelphia. I won't go into it, but I did miss something, and it was pointed out to me the next morning by a radiologist. So those sort of transferable skills. There have been occasions at Liverpool when I did some admin and then had the opportunity to go back into the clinics. I fairly quickly realized that the skills such as I had were those of experience and the ability to question and talk about cases and lead young clinicians towards a diagnosis and a way of managing a case. My technical skills, CSF taps, I don't know, whatever it was, they lapsed, I have to say, and I realized quite quickly, and I could remember my early days as a clinician in Bristol where we had a head of department who was an outstanding head of department, but he's dead now, so I can say this, and not a terribly strong clinician. And he used to come into the clinic, and the young clinicians used to wish that he'd go out of the clinic, because it just took time. He wasn't very quick at some of the things that needed to be done. But what he did have was experience, and so you don't lose that. So yes, and I still think about cases. If I see animals in particular situations, I think, oh yes, I wonder if.
Okay, so let's fast forward a bit. So you come back to UK, you're married, you move up to Liverpool. You've mentioned you have 2 children, and they were both born in Liverpool, were they?
Gosh, no, they weren't. They were born in Bristol.
Okay.
They were 3 and 6 when we went
Right.
up to.
So I hope do you have the joy of grandchildren now?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes, I do. We've got 6 now, actually.
Wow.
Yes, I know. Yes, 3 each. Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
we're very lucky.
Absolutely. So you retired from the university. You've now become the warden of the Honourable Company. I mean, what was the thing that attracted you to signing up for that for the company?
Well, I was introduced to the company while I was at the RAU at Cirencester. Sir Henry Elways, who of course set up the company, 11, 12 years ago now, approached me, and I think his line was, I think the principal of the RAC should be a member of the Honourable Company, which
Absolutely.
and there was some enlightened self-interest from the college's perspective as to the networking and fellowship that's offered by the company was attractive in my role. But I also recognise what the company has as its primary objective, which is to work for Gloucestershire. And I was very keen when I was at the RAU that the RAU should be seen as part of the community of Cirencester and the community of Gloucestershire, because we were important to the county, I thought. I still think that most institutions are important. I think higher education institutions are important for a range of reasons. Some are economic, some are for the skills base that they produce. So I wanted the RAU to be embedded in the county and in Cirencester. So yes, that's when I joined. And now you're going to ask me, how did I become seduced into office?
I expect you got your arm twisted like everybody else does, didn't you?
Well, yes, I think that let's dress that up a bit, shall we? So Henry, in his own inimitable fashion, when I retired, he said, it would be very valuable to the company, and I hope you would be interested in me becoming a member of the business group, because business group covers education, and we don't have an educationalist on the business group. So I said, yeah, of course, Henry, that would, how could I say no? But yes, that would be fine. And I thought it would be fine. I think it was the day after he phoned up and said, "Oh, I forgot to mention that means you'll be a member of court. So you and could you chair the business group too, by the way?" You know, I think I forgot to mention that. So yes, I said, "Oh yeah, that would be fine." And then of course it transpires that if you're a member of court, there is an expectation that you may well be considered to be warden. And so it came to pass, as they say in the Bible.
And do you have anything in particular? I mean, you know, obviously every warden has an input, his or her way of doing things. I mean, do you see any, and you signed up for 2 years, I think, so do you have any?
So they tell me, yes.
But you've had a difficult start, in as much as a lot of the things you may have contemplating have been blown off course with coronavirus and the lockdown. But I mean, is there anything in particular that you feel you'd like to achieve in your tenure?
Well, you're right to say that COVID-19 has changed the perfection of it, as it has in everything. I mean, it has radically changed the way we look at things and the way we're going to have to do things. In some senses, it's made what the Honourable Company can and should do even more important, because, as I said just now, its objective is to work for Gloucestershire. Henry's clear vision was that there was a group of people in Gloucestershire who could bring their talents and their experience and their expertise and their networks to bear for the benefit of the county. And I think the county's going to need that in spades, like everywhere else, over the next short term, medium term, and probably long term as well. Yeah. But it's an opportunity. I think there are things that will be stimulated. I mean, never waste a good crisis. I don't know, I can't remember who said that, but it's one of those apocryphal comments, isn't it? That if you're stressed in any way through a crisis, then there are bound to be silver linings. It's a question of recognizing those. So I think there are things that the company as I say, through its experience of its members, can really offer. I think one thing that persists in a sense from what I think the company should do is, I think the company should recognise that it's most effective when it works in partnership. I don't think it should be rediscovering wheels. I don't think it should suddenly be saying, oh look, we're the Honourable company, we can do this. We can recognise areas of need where there is help needed, and we can look around and say, who are the best people to help bring this about? Because there almost invariably are people who are working in an area. So I think working in partnership, and I also think brokering discussions about areas which others might find more difficult being the prime mover for reasons that are political or appear to have vested interests. The Honourable Company is apolitical. It doesn't have an agenda per se other than helping Gloucestershire. It has no axes to grind on most, if not all, issues. So therefore it can offer the opportunity, it can broker the opportunity for discussion and debate and say, okay, why don't we talk about this and see if there's something we can do, and identify a few people who might like to talk about it as well. So a few ideas, and education is bound to be on my agenda, of course, because I think Tony Blair said education, 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 and I think he's right. And I think those countries and counties and areas which are doing the best in the world are those who've put education at the centre of what they do. And of course, if you're thinking back to what I said earlier, I have a personal perspective on that, because I recognise that my parents gave up a lot. I mean, we had a television relatively late. We had a car relatively late. We went on self-catering holidays because most of what they earned, they used to send my brother and I to a very good direct grant school.
Well, we wish you well, Chris, with everything that you do over the next few months and years, and thank you for your time today.
Well, it'll be with help from people like you, Mark, and the rest of the court and all the members. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And thanks. It's been fun chatting. Thanks.